กับเรียนท่านศาสตราจารย์เกียรติกุลดร.ประวัติปิยวัฒน์บุญหลงค่ะท่านผู้บริหารจากสกสวนะคะท่านผู้ช่วยศาสตราจารย์ดร.ประภัชชนจริยพันธ์ท่านผู้อำนวยการจากสำนักงานติดตามและประเมินผลนะคะสำนักงานคณะกรรมการส่งเสริมวิทยาศาสตร์วิจัยและนวัตกรรมนะคะท่านดร.อนันตโชคโอแสงธรรมนนท์ท่านผู้ช่วยผู้อำนวยการจากสถาบันวิจัยนโยบายเศรษฐกิจการคลังนะคะและผู้มีเกียรติทุกท่านค่ะขอต้อนรับทุกท่านเข้าสู่การประชุมสัมมนาวิชาการครั้งที่4นะคะในโครงการจัดตั้งกลุ่มความร่วมมือหรือคอนโซร์เทียมของผู้ประเมินการวิจัยและนวัตกรรมเพื่อพัฒนารูปแบบการติดตามและการประเมินผลงานวิจัยและนวัตกรรมนะคะภายใต้ระบบวิทยาศาสตร์วิจัยและนวัตกรรมของชาติค่ะซึ่งวันนี้นะคะได้รับเกียรติจากท่านวิทยากรนะคะจากอเมริกานะคะท่านจะได้ให้เกียรติมาบรรยายในหัวข้อในวันนี้นะคะและช่วงนี้ก็ได้เวลาสมควรแล้วดิฉันจะขออนุญาตที่จะกราบเรียนเชิญท่านผู้ช่วยศาสตราจารย์ดร.ประภัชชนจริยพันธ์นะคะได้ให้เกียรติกล่าวถึงวัตถุประสงค์ของการจัดประชุมและได้ให้เกียรติแนะนำวิทยากรในวันนี้ค่ะเรียนเชิญค่ะ
ขอบคุณครับสวัสดีครับผม Honorary guest participant, thank you all for joining this virtual seminar today. On behalf of Thailand Research and Innovation or TSRI, it gives me great pleasure to welcome everyone to the fourth seminar on the development of National Research and Innovation Evaluation Framework. Under the change of the research and innovation system in Thailand, Thailand Science Research and Innovation as the Secretariat of the Science Research and Innovation Monitoring and Evaluation Committee has a role in supporting and facilitating the research and innovation monitoring and evaluation. To make the funding efficient and fruitful, TSRI tries to set up the Evaluators Consortium to make the network for knowledge sharing and development of evaluation science to uplift the standard and quality of monitoring and evaluation of the country. The seminar series is the activities under the Consortium Development Working Group, which aims at creating the knowledge sharing network of the evaluators and the people involved in science research and innovation, monitoring and evaluation at the level of policy deployment, funding administration, and also researchers. The first seminar held in February this year was about collaborative approach to research and innovation in evaluation, lesson from the Canadian context by Ms. Sarah Farina. For the second one, it was our honor to have Ms. Ada Ocampo, the president of International Development Evaluation Association or IDEAS, to give a talk on introduction to evaluation of the SDGs. The third seminar held earlier this month was delivered by Professor Vinod Thomas on research and innovation in evaluation for Asia. For this seminar, or the fourth one, it is our great honor to have a world-renowned Professor Michael Quinn Patton, the former president of the American Evaluation Association and professor of practice at the Claremont Evaluation Center, Claremont Graduate University, to give a talk on blue marble evaluations. Professor Michael Quinn Patton got his doctorate in sociology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and spent 18 years at the University of Minnesota. Professor Patton has written many well-known books, including Developmental Evaluation Exemplars, and also the Blue Marble Evaluation, which is the topic that he will talk about today. I truly believe that you all will gain knowledge about the Blue Marble Evaluations and enjoy his talk. May I wish you all a fruitful seminar. Thank you. Now, please welcome Professor Michael Quinn Patton, please.
ขออนุญาตที่จะ แจ้งประชาสัมพันธ์ก่อนที่จะนำทุกท่านเข้าสู่การรับฟังจากท่านวิทยากรสักครู่หนึ่งนะคะเมื่อสักครู่นี้นะคะได้มีในส่วนของประเด็นสำหรับการรับฟังนะคะการบรรยายวันนี้นะคะท่านสามารถที่จะเลือกรับฟังการบรรยายได้ผ่านทางไอคอนด้านล่างนะคะ2ภาษาด้วยกันในหัวข้อ interpretation นะคะซึ่งปรากฏอยู่บริเวณไอคอนทางด้านล่างจอของทุกท่านในขณะนี้ท่านสามารถเลือกรับฟังเป็นภาษาอังกฤษหรือภาษาไทยได้ผ่านทางช่องทางดังกล่าวนะคะค่ะในช่วงนี้นะคะขออนุญาตที่จะเรียนเชิญดร.อนันตโชคโอแสงธรรมนนท์ท่านผู้ช่วยผู้อำนวยการจากสถาบันวิจัยนโยบายเศรษฐกิจการคลังได้ให้เกียรติในส่วนของกล่าวถึงรายละเอียดในการจัดงานครั้งนี้สักเล็กน้อยค่ะเรียนเชิญค่ะ
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Today, our seminar, we part of the project called Establishing Consortium of Research and Innovation Innovators in Thailand project. Our seminar, we have two sessions. The first one will be the lecture by our distinguished guest, Professor Michael Quinn Patton, on the topic of rule marble evaluation. And after that, we will have a discussion between the participants, and the seminar will end around 12 o'clock today. So we would like to welcome Professor Michael Quinn Patton, as which is the renowned expert in the area of evaluation. And today we will listen to the lecture on the rule marble evaluation, which is a new innovative approach to look at the subject as a whole, and also it will take into account on all aspects about the evaluation. Okay, without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Michael Quinn Patton to give us a lecture. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very honored to be able to join you for this seminar. I want to thank the organizers and thank the translators who will be assisting in making my communications clear. And thank you as an audience for joining on this topic. So I'm going to share my screen. The book on blue marble evaluation just came out last year, and blue marble refers to the iconic image of the earth, and to move you into that space of thinking about our globe, our shared planet, and the research and evaluation implications of that. I want to begin by showing you some images of the blue marble so that we have a context for talking about what it means to take a global perspective. So to make the transition from your busy lives into this moment, let me begin with some images of the blue marble. So that gives you a sense of our global connection as all sharing the planet Earth. And Blue Marble evaluation emerged to deal with global issues that cut across national borders, sectors, silos, and the other things that divide us. This work began as I began evaluation some 50 years ago. I'm a full-time evaluator and have been throughout my career. My first book was in 1978 on making evaluation useful. The new 5th edition of that book will be out in November of this year. Developmental evaluation is about applying complexity concepts to evaluation. Principles-focused evaluation is about being guided by principles that are adaptable to complex dynamic situations, which brings us to Blue Marble evaluation, taking a global perspective. We know that the Earth is in trouble, or at least humanity on the Earth is in trouble. Global warming is increasing at an accelerating rate. The problems of air pollution, land pollution, ocean pollution, refugee populations, the increasingly severe weather, great storms, and of course, the pandemic. One of the core messages of Blue Marble evaluation is to think globally, act locally and globally, and evaluate the interactions between the local and the global. Blue Marble evaluation began in 2015 when the United Nations declared the International Year of Evaluation to strengthen national evaluation capacities. And I was deeply involved in that effort with the International Organization for Cooperation and Evaluation, with eval partners, with efforts around the world to strengthen national evaluation capacities in accordance with evaluating the new Sustainable Development Goals at that time. I've long taught in the International Program for Development evaluation training, and in the course of engaging in those efforts to strengthen national evaluation capacity throughout the year of 2015, it became increasingly clear to me that many of our problems transcended national boundaries, that the SDGs themselves were becoming silos, very great machinery oriented at some 180 goals and 215 indicators, very isolated, autonomous, and that part of what we needed was a larger, bigger, more global perspective to balance the emphasis on national evaluation efforts. The Millennium Development Goal period between 2000 and 2015 produced over 450 reports. And one of the findings of those reports in aggregate was a disconnect between global issues and country level issues. The World Bank growth strategies emphasized the primacy of country ownership in both the MDGs and the SDGs, and that continues. But when we compare images between the Blue Marble and our nation states, we find that a great many of the issues we face transcend those borders. In the great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., in his memorial in Washington, D.C., has this large quote in marble that says, "Every nation must now develop an overriding loyalty to mankind as a whole in order to preserve the best in their individual societies." Global problems then transcend national and agency boundaries. Climate change, global warming, economic turbulence, more refugees in the world now than at any time since World War II, virulent infectious diseases like the pandemic, HIV/AIDS, dying oceans, global cyber terrorism, international drug cartels, human trafficking, weapons trafficking, poverty and inequality, multinational corporate collusion. The list goes on and on. This is simply a beginning list. The problems, the definitions of these problems are disputed. The facts are a matter of intense debate. Politics and special interests dominate. National interest, multinational corporate interest, agency agendas, competition for resources. The stakes are huge. We say that evaluation grew up in the projects, meaning evaluation came out 50 years ago as a way of assessing the effectiveness of projects and programs. And that project and program mentality remains dominant today. Most of our tools, most of our frameworks, most of our indicators, most of our criteria come from a project point of view. And we've gotten very good at doing project and program evaluation. We can evaluate grants, projects and programs, clusters of grants, goal attainment, outcomes evaluation, implementation evaluation. We know how to generate findings and lessons and recommendations about the effectiveness of projects and programs. But now evaluation is being asked to take on different units of analysis. Evaluating mission fulfillment, strategy, innovation, advocacy campaigns, policy changes, systems change, complex dynamic interventions, community impacts, regional initiatives, networks and collaborations, leadership, inclusiveness and diversity, innovation, collective impact, scaling, environmental ecosystem sustainability, global systems change, and global transformation. None of these things are projects. None of them are programs. And so we need new frameworks, new ways of engaging in order to take on the challenges of new units of analysis. The Blue Marble evaluation approach is a set of principles. And I don't have time to take you through all of these 16 principles, but I will highlight a few of them to give you a taste of what the Blue Marble perspective is. And it begins with global thinking, applying whole earth, big picture thinking to all aspects of systems change, connected to the global principle, integrating complex interactions and interconnections across levels, as I said earlier, connecting the local with the global, being able to zoom out to get the big picture and zoom in to look at whatever it is that you're working on and how the global context affects your own research and your own evaluation. The word global has been created to combine the idea of global and local. Global is the integration of the local and the global. I'm coming to you today from the state of Minnesota in the north central part of the United States on the Canadian border. Our air today is filled with smoke from forest fires in Canada and in northern Minnesota. The air quality alerts warned people not to go outside. We have been setting record temperatures for the entire month of July and most of June, temperatures not ordinarily seen in the state of Minnesota. We know that these things are part of global warming. Minnesota is celebrating the 50th anniversary of one of its great innovations. The 3M company, headquartered in Minnesota, invented Post-it notes or sticky notes 50 years ago. And it's an interesting evaluation story because the creation of Post-it notes was a failed glue. They were working on new kinds of glue in the adhesive division of the 3M company, and the effort they were making to create a new glue failed. And it took 2 years before they discovered that that glue actually had a purpose, that there was a market for a glue that did not glue. Nobody set out to make a glue that didn't glue. No one had a vision of a glue that didn't glue, but it became one of the most important and profitable products in the entire history of the 3M company. And it's a reminder that sometimes what at first seems like a failure may turn out to be a success, and what it sometimes initially may appear to be a success in the long run may be a failure. And as we face global warming and the challenges of human survival on the earth, we have to bring to that a certain amount of modesty about being able to predict what is success and failure in the long term. The state motto in Minnesota is the land of 10,000 lakes. This is where in North America, the last glacier melted during the Ice Age and left a state filled with lakes and rivers. The mighty Mississippi River runs all the way through the United States from north to south, beginning in Minnesota. And so, as you might suspect, a major occupation and hobby of people in Minnesota is fishing. And for years, when I have taught evaluation in Minnesota and worked with community groups and agencies and programs to begin an evaluation, I would begin by talking about fishing, not about evaluation. I would ask, so how is your fishing? How many fish did you catch? What kind of fish did you catch? Who did you go fishing with? Where did you go fishing? Did you fish for food or for recreation? There are competitions for fishing. And Minnesota, which gets very, very cold in the winter, also has ice fishing. People fish in the winter, in the cold, they fish in the heat, in the summer. But in the last 5 years, as part of Blue Marble evaluation, as I've told people that all the issues in evaluation are in fishing, what constitutes a successful day of fishing? Is it how many fish you caught? Is it what kind of fish you caught? Is it the size of the fish? Is it the time you spent with the people you were fishing? Those questions have changed in the context of our climate emergency. And I've gone from talking about evaluating fishing to evaluating the sustainability of the fishing ecosystem. Lake Superior and the Great Lakes that are part of Minnesota, watershed, has 20% of the world's fresh water. And yet it is suffering from plastic, great amounts of plastic in the water, of pollution, of deteriorating shorelines, of invasive species that are coming in, of severe weather that is threatening the quality of the water. And we are currently in a great drought, which is threatening lakes and rivers, all a part of the global climate warming. And so helping people make the connection that all of us are in a climate emergency calls for everyone to address that emergency, not just through projects and programs, but through systems change. And evaluating systems change is very different than evaluating a project or program intervention. And so as we look beyond borders to a more global perspective, we have precedents and inspiration. From international to global, perhaps most well-known is Doctors Without Borders. There are engineers without borders. There are teachers who teach around the world, Teachers Without Borders. There are reporters without borders who do global news journalism. There are translators without borders. Let me again express my appreciation to the translator today. There are libraries without borders, creating global reservoirs of great literature for the worldwide. There are MBAs, Masters in Business Administration without borders. There are even clowns without borders. And so are we ready for evaluators without borders? Evaluators who can take a global perspective to take on global issues. In the book, Principles Focused Evaluation, I lay out a guide for engaging in looking at global systems. And that cover is inspired by colleagues in Canada. The sculpture on the cover is called a nutchuck. These are large cairns that exist in the Arctic area of the Northern Hemisphere to guide indigenous people through the wilderness. And that's what principles do. They guide us through the uncertain terrain, the unpredictable terrain of an uncertain, complex world. The Blue Marble evaluation core principles then provide a way to think about the challenges that we face. One of those challenges involves thinking globally and bringing evaluative thinking into the global context. In the last decade, evaluation has come to increasingly focus upon the importance of rigorous thinking, not just rigorous methods. Thinking is what makes methods rigorous. Methods by themselves are not rigorous. It is how they are done, how they are thought about, how they are implemented. And so bringing evaluative thinking to bear requires critical thinking, inferential thinking, skill in interpreting evidence, and increasingly, the challenge of Blue Marble evaluation is systems thinking and global thinking. The great cosmologist Carl Sagan said, science is a way of thinking much more than it is a body of knowledge. I did a book a year ago with a philosopher, Elizabeth Minich, called Thinking, Action, and the Fate of the World, what we called thought work, the importance of being able to think about things in a critical global systems way. So the global thinking principle of Blue Marble evaluation is that global problems like climate change, worldwide pollution, and global disparities between rich and poor require global interventions and correspondingly globally oriented and world savvy evaluators. This means applying whole earth, big picture thinking to all aspects of systems change. The great Albert Einstein said, we cannot solve our problems with the same level of thinking that created them. So we need to up our game in a way as we approach the Olympics, up our game in research and evaluation to a genuinely global level, to take a whole earth perspective. And so Blue Marble principles apply both to design of interventions and evaluation. One of the principles of Blue Marble evaluation is to integrate needs assessment, design, implementation, and evaluation. We have separated those functions, but in fact, they are together. They're not sequential. They are ongoing. They are interconnected. And so to design global interventions, we need to look beyond nation-state borders and boundaries to affect transnational, regional, and global patterns, interactions, and dynamics. And the evaluation question becomes, to what extent and in what ways is an initiative or intervention truly global in both processes and results? I find a lot of agencies, programs, and initiatives, interventions have taken on the language of global without really being global. And so fidelity is what evaluators do when we ask if it is really global. Sample dimensions for global scale assessment is an effort global in perspective? Is it global in operations? Is it global in participation? Is it global in knowledge and content? Is it global in collaborative connections and relationships? global in networking, global geographically, global in staffing, global in financing, global evaluation indicators, global in aspiration, global virtually. To take on these challenges of the difficulties humanity is having. The coronavirus captures that as well as anything. In the last 2 years now, we have truly been in a global pandemic, varying by country, varying by region, and far from over. There's a upsurge with the new Delta morphine of the coronavirus of COVID-19. And so that reminds us of the context within which we're operating. Part of that context is what is now being called the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene is a new geographic designation by the geographic community that we have moved into a new era in the Earth's history where human beings are having more impact on the Earth than natural geologic processes. Human actions have created the global problems humanity faces. Human actions are necessary to resolve these problems. Thus, there are things for evaluators to know about global sustainability in the context of what's called the Anthropocene, to undertake evaluations knowledgeably and credibly. The principle is to know and face the realities of the Anthropocene and act accordingly. The Anthropocene is a recognition that the ways in which humans are affecting the environment are not sustainable. So that comes out of the Earth system sciences of the 1970s and 80s. The climate concern emerged in the 1980s and 1990s. The term Anthropocene was first proposed in 2000. We now have a global movement looking at planetary boundaries because we are using the Earth's resources at an unsustainable level. And that has led to the SDGs and the Paris Agreement on climate change. None of those indicators, none of those goals are being met. Geologic time, Earth's history has been broken up into time units based on the fossils contained within the rocks. These units are part of the geologic time scale. The time scale is broken up into units called eons, eras, periods, and epochs. And the history of the Earth goes back 4.6 billion years. Our planet, the blue marble, is 4.6 billion years old. And we've been in what's called the Holocene for the last 10 to 12,000 years. And now we have moved into this era where we're facing the possibility of extinction of much life on Earth, what's called the sixth extinction. 5 previous times in the history of the Earth, 85 to 90% of life was wiped out. Most recently, when the dinosaurs roamed the Earth. And we are now in the 6th extinction, massively losing biodiversity, massively losing species, and the future of humanity is at stake. This is the cover of The Economist magazine saying, welcome to the Anthropocene. All of the indicators since 1950 of carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, methane, surface temperatures, ocean acidification, marine fish capture, tropical forest loss. All of these have been massively accelerating since the 1950s. Population growth, urban populations, water use, on and on. And as the great management scholar Peter Drucker said, the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence, it is to act with yesterday's logic. Yesterday's logic of evaluation is project and program focused. The future is in global systems change. The Ecology and Society Journal put out a special issue naming the concept of the Anthropocene as a game changer, a new context for social innovation and transformations to sustainability. And so we have to adapt research and evaluation to the realities of the Anthropocene. So there are 4 overarching blue marble premises. The first we've talked about, global thinking principle. The second transformation as context principle to know that we're in a new geologic era that is not sustainable because of our overuse of the Earth's resources. The third principle I'll talk about is transformative engagement principle, transforming systems on a global scale. And the fourth overarching principle I mentioned is the integration principle, to integrate the blue marble principles, to integrate needs assessment, situation analysis, design, implementation, and evaluation in an ongoing, integrated, deeply aligned process. Looking across boundaries, doing the connection between the global and the local. And as evaluators, we have to assess those things that are going well, new innovations that are working, new possibilities, new hopes, against the things that are not going well, the deterioration of the planet, through the kind of challenges I'm talking about. And we sit there between pessimism and optimism, between the bad news about what's going on and the good news, trying to sort out what's working and what's not working. And that we have to do that together in networks around the world, working across silos of education, of health, of environment, of the economy, working across agency silos to take a whole Earth perspective. The 2030 agenda that the SDGs are based on is described as a transformative agenda. We live in a world where massive concentration of wealth and privilege exists in the hands of a few. The richest 1% of the population owns 40% of the world's wealth, while the poorest 50% of the population owns only 1% of the world's wealth. Yesterday, the richest man in the world spent his money on a trip to outer space for 8 minutes. He paid to have a rocket built so that he could go up to the upper atmosphere and come back down. This is an example of the great disparities in wealth in the world. The 17 SDGs are important, but they've become siloed, as I said. And so we have to overcome those boundaries as well and see the interrelationships among the SDGs, the interconnections, because they are interconnected. They can't be dealt with in isolated silos. The Stockholm Resilience Center grouped together the SDGs by those that affect the biosphere, like water, land, air, those that affect society, like hunger, equality, equity, those that affect the economy, production and consumption, and at the top, our need to create collaborations to do all of this work. But we need even greater integration of the SDGs at a global level. And that's a part of what Blue Marble evaluation aspires to. So as we look at the imbalances in the world between the sustainability of our human population and the Earth, we have to find a greater balance. And that's going to mean major transformation of systems around the world. Blue Marble evaluation does not involve any particular kind of methods. Bricolage is a French term for pulling together whatever you need to make something. And so bricolage means you can use any kind of methods to do Blue Marble evaluation. It's not method specific, it is thinking specific. And thinking helps you decide what methods are appropriate for particular issues. And it involves looking at a theory of transformation. And I'll talk to you about what that involves, why we need transformation and the nature of transformation. And as we prepare to do that, let me give you a 5-minute break at this point. I've been talking at you nonstop. We'll take a short 5-minute break and come back, and I'll move in to transformation. You can be entering in questions and comments in the chat. And in the last part of the seminar, I'll take up those questions and comments. but let me give you a chance to refresh and take a break. So we'll get back together in 5 minutes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Patton, for a very stimulating and interesting first session. Okay, right now we have a 5-minute break. You can leave your questions in the chat box. So Professor Patton can read and then answer your questions accordingly. Okay, and for those of you at the end of the session, for those of you who would like to ask the questions directly to the Professor Patton, you can raise your hand through the Zoom application, and then we will allow you to ask the question to the professor. Okay, thank you.
ค่ะอย่างที่ดร.นันทโชคได้เรียนแจ้งทุกท่านนะคะสำหรับการถามคำถามท่านสามารถมีประเด็นคำถามได้ผ่านทางช่องทางแชทนะคะหรือว่าจะยกมือเพื่อที่จะสอบถามกับท่านวิทยากรโดยตรงนะคะท่านสามารถสอบถามวิทยากรได้ทั้งภาษาอังกฤษนะคะในห้องที่รับฟังเป็นภาษาอังกฤษหรือภาษาไทยนะคะโดยทางคณะทำงานจะมีล่ามที่จะคอยแปลในส่วนของคำถามให้กับทุกท่านให้กับวิทยากรอีกครั้งหนึ่งค่ะท่านรับฟังในช่องทางภาษาอังกฤษหรือภาษาไทยท่านสามารถที่จะถามในห้องที่ท่านรับฟังได้เลยนะคะโดยใช้ภาษาเดียวกันกับที่ท่านได้รับฟังอยู่ในห้องในขณะนี้นะคะขอบคุณค่ะค่ะในช่วงที่รอวิทยากรพักเบรกนะคะท่านสามารถที่จะพิมพ์ประเด็นคำถามผ่านในช่องแชทบ็อกซ์นะคะซึ่งปรากฏอยู่บริเวณด้านล่างหน้าจอของทุกท่านในขณะนี้ได้เลยนะคะคาดว่าท่านวิทยากรน่าจะกลับมาตอบคำถามหรืออาจจะมาบรรยายก่อนแล้วอาจจะรวบรวมคำถามไว้ตอบในช่วงท้ายในครั้งเดียวนะคะ
Okay, so welcome back, Professor Patton, and welcome back, everyone. So for the first session, Professor Patton have talked about the world have changed, the problem have to change to become more global, and then we also have to change our approach to the evaluation. So Professor talked about that we should look at the global and system change rather than the project change level. And now we continue with the second session with the transformation session. So please, Dr. Patton, I would like to hand over the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Welcome back. So the discussion so far may have been somewhat abstract. So I'd like to make it concrete about one of the examples of global transformation that is underway. In September, the United Nations is hosting a World Food Systems Summit in which countries and civil society organizations, international agencies, farmers, producers, consumers, people from around the world involved in all aspects of agriculture and food are coming together to examine the future of food and the transformation of food systems. And Blue Marble evaluation is involved in helping to synthesize the dialogue that are taking place about what are being called game-changing solutions for food systems transformation. So I'm going to show you a short video about the Food Systems Summit to help make this more concrete about what it means to take a global perspective. If we can have the video, please.
Okay. Please wait a second for the video to play.
If there's difficulty, I can show it from my end.
Our team is looking for the video and then we play the video. Please wait for a moment. It helps to play.
Your Excellencies, colleagues, and friends, as you know, last year the UN Secretary General called for a food systems summit to unleash the power of food to drive progress across all 17 United Nations development goals. I thank you for stepping forward to become a leader for the food systems change. These dialogues bring together people from all parts of society to share evidence, experience, and new ideas. Food is powerful. The food we eat brings us together as families, as communities, and as nations. It underpins our culture, our economies, and our relationship with the natural world. The world's food system touches every aspect of human existence, which makes them valuable instruments of change. The reason we are having a summit this year, and the reason we are here today, is because we are off track. We are not set to achieve on our shared vision and goals for the 2030 agenda. Our food systems have staggering levels of inequality. Our key priority for this summit is to bring more inclusive, equitable, and healthier food systems while also safeguarding our planet. These dialogues are a core element of the summit process. They are an opportunity to come together and identify priorities and actions to be taken for a better future. This will be a people's summit, but it will also be a solution summit because everyone is part of the food system. We are looking to get all of you and your ideas around the table to ensure that action is owned and driven by different actors. We want action to be driven by you. Your leadership and ability to have courageous conversations rather than avoid them will be very critical. If we can't have courageous conversations about what needs to change and how we need to work together, then we won't be able to go very far. We need each of you to determine the food system you want for your future and to act on it to make them a reality. We must do this understanding fully well our place in the world and that what we do as individuals impacts on others. I look forward to working with you in this summit process. Together, we can build a world of inclusive growth, environmental sustainability, and social justice. we can build a resilient world where no one is hungry, no one is poor, and no one is left behind. I thank you.
So I have put in the chat a report on the upcoming summit that the Blue Marble Evaluation Network has just posted last week. There are a number of tracks preparing for the Food System Summit, including a number in Thailand. Their member states are holding dialogues on food systems. Civil society organizations, research organizations, think tanks are holding dialogues in preparation for the summit. A number of those have taken place in Thailand. If you go to the Food System Summit dialogue portal, you can search for those dialogues by country and by topic. What we have been doing, in addition to the action tracks that are already underway, preparing for the summit to come up with new proposals and initiatives for the future of food, is we are analyzing and synthesizing the results of the what are called the independent dialogues that are taking place and the themes that have emerged about how to guide the future of food. And at the top of that list, I'm just going to share with you the major themes from that report. So through June, there have been 603 of these independent dialogues with a great deal of emphasis on sustainability. There are issues around topics on youth, nutrition and malnutrition, women and gender, climate, food security and insecurity, food for all, ending hunger, issues of health, transformation, resilience, inclusion, finance, and local adaptation. 746 dialogues have been registered as of today, and they are continuing. And so what we've done is synthesize the first 100 of those reports through our Blue Marble network based upon that iconic image and in the context of the pandemic, the issues that people are facing globally. We've taken the reports, we code them, we analyze them. Going to go through this very quickly. You can read about it in the full report, but these dialogues tend to last about an hour and a half. They've involved more than 10,000 people, balanced fairly evenly by gender. And these dialogues don't so much propose solutions for transforming systems as guidance for how solutions should be identified, implemented, and evaluated. The overall observations from the dialogues are that food systems and climate change are interconnected, that all solutions will require education about food and food systems. Economic and finance issues will cut across any and all solutions. Solutions must be consistent with scientific evidence. Policy and regulatory reforms will be needed to support and enable solutions. Better use of technologies and development of new technologies is critical, and systematic evaluation of solutions will be essential. These are all observations to improve adaptation and mitigate various problems like greater access to food, climate change, scaling, education initiatives, achieving more equity, reducing food waste, and supporting health and nutrition. And so the 10 themes that have emerged globally from our analysis for the future of food systems transformation are, first, that transforming food systems must be guided by principles of equitable and sustainable. So The dialogues acknowledge the need to transform, and I'm going to talk about what that means, and that transformation means greater equity and sustainability. That systems thinking must be applied. This means moving, as I said, beyond projects and programs to changing and transforming systems. The importance of adapting solutions to diverse local contexts, integrating the local and the global, what I called glocal, valuing diversity and engaging inclusively in order to ensure equity, shifting perspectives and changing mindsets. We have to change how we think about food and food systems in relation to climate, to health, to the pandemic, to social justice issues. Innovating and integrating what is already working into innovation. This will be a major responsibility and challenge for evaluation. As innovation occurs, what are the things that are already working well that need to be maintained even as innovation occurs? Facilitating conflict resolutions and negotiating trade-offs. Mobilizing engaged and accountable actors collaboratively. This means governments, private sector, public sector, civil society organizations, international agencies, working collaboratively to take on global food system transformation. And finally, there's great concern in these dialogues about openness and transparency, that too much of what happens in the world is behind closed doors, is under the radar, and there's great concern among people looking to the future of food that decisions and transformation initiatives and evaluations should be transparent. And so that full report will give you the details of what those things mean, but that's an example of an actual blue marble evaluation taking on global food systems to understand the processes involved in that work. So let me talk about what we mean here by transformation. We're not just talking about small changes. We're actually, given the ways in which the indicators are running that we've been discussing, the difficulties that humanity is in with global warming, with pollution of land, sea, and air, with displaced populations, inequities, social justice concerns. We're seeing the language of transformation appearing everywhere. On the cover of Science magazine, books about the need for transformation. I did a book with two Canadian authors entitled Getting to Maybe, How the World Has Changed. It was about transformation through social movements. The executive director of the World Wildlife Fund said, Tanya Steele said, quote, "We are the first generation to know that we are destroying the planet and the last generation that can do anything about it. Many of the indicators suggest that the year 2030, not that far away, is the tipping point beyond which human survival will be very much in doubt. And so we face a climate emergency. This cartoon from The Economist magazine shows the world's battle with the coronavirus as a warm-up fight globally, with climate change standing outside the ring, ready to come in as a much greater threat to humanity. There have been a number of transformation conferences going on globally. I participated in one in Scotland, where Terry Ahern, the CEO of the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency, opened by saying, in Scotland, we are living as if we have the resources of 3 planets when we only have 1. Australia is consuming 5 planets of resources. For the world as a whole, we are consuming the Earth's resources as if we have nearly 2 planets. We only have 1. Professor Ian Fezzi of the Center for Environmental Change in his keynote said climate change really does change everything. If we are going to meet global targets or stabilize global temperatures, then we're going to have significant change, whether we like it or not. Transformations include personal transformations, community transformations, organizational transformations, community transformations, regional transformations, national transformations, and global transformations, interconnected across boundaries. Kumi Naidu, the launch executive director of the African Civil Society Initiative, has said the most important challenge for leadership of our time, whether the leaders are from the private sector, from government, or from civil society, is how we can tell it like it is, speak truth to power, and say that we are 5 minutes till midnight on climate change. Midnight is when humanity's survival is in doubt. So another example of global work is the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, a coalition of 30 philanthropic organizations across 4 continents that have been working on the future of food for the last 10 years. And Ruth Richardson, the director of the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, this is different than the Food Systems Summit of the United Nations. The Global Alliance is one of the players in the UN Food Systems Summit. Ruth Richardson said, "We believe that transformational change requires that we craft new and better solutions at all scales through a systems level approach and deep collaboration between philanthropy, researchers, grassroots movements, the private sector, farmers and food systems workers, indigenous peoples, government, and policymakers. Transformation means realizing healthy, equitable, renewable, resilient, and culturally diverse food systems shared by people, communities, and their institutions." We talked earlier about the Agenda 2030, No One Left Behind, is a transformative agenda. There are SDG transformation forums working to integrate the SDGs. I'm coming to you from Minnesota, where George Floyd was murdered just over a year ago by a police officer that led to international and global social justice protests and an invigoration of the Black Lives Matter movement. Another form of systems change. And these are interconnected. The social justice movement, the climate movement, the pandemic work, the work against pollution, the work against human trafficking, the world food systems changes. Systems change beyond projects means deep change, broad change, long-term change. Now, one of the most common stories that you'll appreciate in Thailand, trying to explain systems thinking, is the story of the 9 blind people and the elephant. This story is present in one form or another in most cultures in the world. It's one of the most widespread kinds of stories that children learn and that adults tell in cultures around the world. And as you know, it's a story of 9 blind people, each of whom touch a different part of the elephant. One touches the side and says an elephant is like a wall. Another touches a rope and says an elephant, touches the tail and says an elephant is like a rope. Another touches the trunk and says an elephant is like a snake. Another touches the leg and says an elephant's like a tree. Another touches the ear and says it's like a fan. Another touches the tusk and says it's like a spear. And of course, the moral of the story is that you have to put all of those parts together to know the elephant. It is indicative, it is symbolic of how far people are from systems thinking that story is taught as a systems story. It is not. It is a reductionist, linear, add up the parts to get the whole story. You never will understand the elephant if the only place that you ever see an elephant is in the zoo by itself. You won't understand the elephant no matter how many times you take it apart and put the parts back together. To understand the elephant from a systems point of view, we have to understand it in its natural ecosystem as a highly social animal, where elephants roam in herds to take care of their young, where they move through the jungles of Asia and the savannas of Africa in relationship to the plants and animals in the ecosystem, the flora and the fauna in an ecosystem. A systems perspective is to look at things in relationship, not to take them apart into their little pieces and add them up. It's to see interconnections and interrelationships. And so to understand the elephant, we have to understand it as a herd in relationship to other animals and plants, including human beings, and the devastation that the ivory trade has done, and global attempts to deal with ivory. No country by itself can stop the slaughter of the elephants. And the pandemic has had a major effect on elephants. The scarcity of food, the changing patterns of climate in Africa are threatening elephant populations in the game parks. And so, as this cartoon shows in a zoo, the zoo director is saying to the children, of course, things are slightly different in the wild. And the point here is that there's a relationship between what goes in, that is how we think about things, and what comes out. What conceptual framework informs our situation recognition and sense making? We've been caught in this project and program linear logic model SMART goals framework. You are working on new frameworks for innovation, and systems change and transformation, I want to suggest, is such a framework. Principles of systems thinking involve understanding interrelationships, involve understanding different perspectives and how they affect those interrelationships, means understanding boundaries and the connection about where we draw boundaries, because systems are socially constructed, and the dynamics of systems, how they are changing, how relationships, perspectives, and boundaries are changing. This moves us to a very different way of thinking. Much research and evaluation is highly reductionist, is highly fragmented, highly isolated, not taking a systems perspective. Complexity concepts that inform transformation means looking at how things emerge in self-organizing attractors, non-linear interactions, where small actions can generate large effects, where things are dynamic within, between, and among subsystems, and the parts within systems, volatile and changing. And we've seen that with the pandemic. There's not a straight line solution to the pandemic. There are waves, wave 1, wave 2, wave 3, new forms of the virus. The Delta strain, and now a new strain is emerging. Uncertainty, unpredictability, uncontrollability, unanticipated consequences, interdependence of things, adaptation, and tipping points, critical mass, not knowable in advance, but clear afterwards. This calls us to think differently about how we do research and evaluation in multiple pathways converging. There's a useful book that came out a year ago called The Water of Systems Change. This is available for download free online. And it opened with the story of a fish swimming along in the ocean, comes along upon another fish, and the fish says, "Hey, how's the water?" And the first fish stares back blankly, and the first fish stares back blankly at the second fish and then says, "What's water?" That story is meant to remind us of the challenge of even understanding the systems that we're a part of. They are often invisible to us. One of the things that Blue Marble evaluation aims to do is to make the invisible visible, so that when we talk about systemic racism, systemic inequality, systemic pollution, systemic climate change. That those systems are not things that we can just look at in the world. We have to make them visible and call them into being so that people can see what their consequences are. The Water of Systems Transformation has a 6-factor framework that looks at structural changes, changes in policies, practices, and resource flows, relational changes, relationships and connections changing, power dynamics changing, and transformative change to be enduring requires mental models changing. You saw that one of the characteristics of the Food System Summit guiding themes that I identified was changing mental models, changing perspectives, changing mindsets, how we think about the world, how we think about our connections to each other globally, how we think about climate, how we think about food, how we think about justice. These are the challenges of a transformed world. And so when we look at transformation, we have to look historically at things like the end of apartheid, the end of slavery, the Muhammad Yunus's microfinance social movement around the world that made social capital available to and financial capital available to very poor people, especially women without collateral. His Grameen Bank was a transformation, solidarity group lending, dividing a loan among several recipients, focusing on women. He felt that women were more reliable, typically at fulfilling their payment obligations and cooperating with their peers. Women would overwhelmingly invest in their families' well-being, envision microfinance as a vehicle for female empowerment. And he won the Nobel Prize for that, changing how we think about capital in the world. The transformation. Is transformation difficult to measure? Well, the answer may surprise you. I argue that transformation, measuring transformation, is the easiest job evaluators have ever had. If you have to run a statistical significance test to know whether something has changed, it has not transformed. Transformation is palpable, it's large, it's big scale. We call it interocular significance. Interocular significance means it hits you between the eyes. This is a sensitizing concept. The end of apartheid, the end of slavery, the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union. Transformations can be negative or positive. The election of Donald Trump in the American presidency was a transformation. The election of President Obama was a transformation. The end of Donald Trump's presidency was a transformation. And each of these, pushing back the AIDS epidemic, the Me Too movement globally, social media, transformations can be either positive or negative, but they are major, they are visible. What is hard to measure are trajectories, pathways toward transformation. The Independent Evaluation Group of the World Bank has identified 4 dimensions of transformation. First, relevance, that it addresses a major developmental challenge such as poverty, equity, or climate change. Secondly, the depth of change. It causes or supports fundamental change in a system or market, addresses a root cause, supports a change in directory. The scale of change causes large-scale impact at a national or global level. And sustainability. Impact is economically, financially, and environmentally sustainable in the long term. The Climate Investment Fund has similar sets of criteria. The strategic changes, large-scale catalytic changes, systemic changes, and sustainability, which requires us then to have a theory of transformation. I'm just going to have time to touch on this to give you a sense of what it is. And if it interests you, you can read about it in the Blue Marble Evaluation book. One of the principles of Blue Marble Evaluation is that we need a theory of transformation. Now, this is building on the notion of theory of change. Carol Weiss, one of the great evaluation pioneers, was part of a conference in 1995 where major philanthropic foundations were developing community change programs to combat poverty. And at that conference, she was quite critical that these philanthropic staff from philanthropic foundations and government planners, private sector planners were coming together and designing programs to combat poverty with no knowledge of the literature, with no theory of change, with no knowledge of how communities change, with no knowledge of the empirical social science research on which change is based. They were just sitting up around making things up. And she was alarmed and aghast. And so she made a presentation that became one of the most important papers in the history of research and evaluation, called Nothing as Practical as Good Theory, in which she argued that projects and programs should be based upon a theory of change. And that is how we got into logic modeling and SMART goals and program theory, was through that influential work from Carol Weiss. But the theory of change work is project and program level theory. Systems change requires a theory of transformation that is actually made up of multiple program theories. When we look at how the major transformations have occurred, like the end of apartheid, what we find is that there were multiple theories of change going on. There were people up in the upper left, what I call triangulated social change theory, means that there were, at the end of apartheid or the end of slavery or the HIV/AIDS epidemic, and now with the pandemic, there are people working in different trajectories. There are people working on regulatory changes. There are people working on economic and financial changes. There are people working on educating people. There are incentives work. There are institutional changes. And so transformation isn't something that has one person or one organization in charge. A theory of transformation is weaving together, integrating multiple actors, each taking on their own responsibility, but networking together to make policy changes, regulatory changes, educational changes, institutional changes, and that together these create a critical mass that leads to tipping points. You see, surrounding the middle there is systems thinking, complexity theory, strategic alignment theory, making sure that the pieces fit together, learning theory, how do we get better at learning what's working, integration theory, integrating, as I've said, needs assessment, design, implementation, evaluation, iceberg theory in the bottom left. Icebergs have 10% of their mass visible above the ocean, 90% is below the ocean. Iceberg theory tells us to pay attention not just to formal policies, not just to formal agreements, treaties, contracts, indicators, but informal. What's beneath the surface? What's not visible? How do we make the invisible visible? Much of what happens globally among corporations, among governments, is behind the scenes, is informal. That's one of the reasons a major guiding theme for the Food System Summit is the demand to be open and transparent, to get out of the shadows, to get from underneath the water and make things visible. And developmental evaluation. The question in the chat box about how developmental evaluation relates to Blue Marble evaluation. Developmental evaluation calls for ongoing evaluation of how trajectories are unfolding. So developmental evaluation is actually a part of Blue Marble evaluation, not separate from it. It is a way of engaging with Blue Marble global transformation at a global level. It moves beyond the notion of doing midterm and end of project evaluations or formative and summative evaluations to doing ongoing look at the connections among people within a theory of transformation, the connections among different avenues of work, and helping develop those in an innovative space. So developmental evaluation is a framework for conducting Blue Marble evaluations. And so these transformative actions that are taken by people engaging in systems change work with evaluators to test out the theory of transformation through developmental evaluation feedback. So the final thing I want to talk with you about is evaluation criteria for transformation. And I'll take a few minutes to do this. We'll take another short break and then enter into the question and answer period for the remainder of the seminar. Evaluation criteria are critical. This is based upon an article that was just published in the American Journal of Evaluation that I wrote called Evaluation Criteria for Evaluating Transformation, and focuses on the implications of the coronavirus pandemic and the global climate emergency. Michael Scriven, another one of our great pioneers, described the logic of evaluation as a four-step process: defining the criteria that will be used to evaluate something, setting standards of performance on those criteria, measuring the actual performance, and synthesizing the results to reach an evaluative judgment. He said the key challenge in this work is how to combine the factual premises with the value premises. Value premises concern things like sustainability and equity. Criteria matter. Criteria constitute, metaphorically, the nuclear core, the atomic core of evaluation's energy function, rendering judgment. Without criteria, there can be no judgment. Without judgment, there can be no evaluation. Criteria express, manifest, encompass, make explicit, and operationalize what is valued. Criteria mediate the conversion of values into judgments. Criteria prioritize what is important. Criteria direct what questions to ask, data to collect, and results to highlight. Criteria focus evaluation, reporting, and results. To what extent and in what ways have criteria been met? That's the core of evaluative thinking. So in 1991, the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, created a development assistance committee with evaluation responsibilities, and they came up with 5 criteria for projects, for international development projects. Relevance, that the project addresses national priorities. Effectiveness, that the project achieves outcomes. Efficiency, cost-benefit calculations. Impact, the results of the project on the larger world. And sustainability, which is really continuity. Did the results get maintained? And those have become the most widespread dominant criteria in the international development world. They're used by all international agencies. They're used by many country agencies. They're used by foreign aid units of donor countries for international development aid. And 2 years ago, the DAC committee of OECD went through a consultation process to decide whether or not to revise the criteria. They did surveys, they held major stakeholder consultations, they interviewed key stakeholders, they got a large number of responses to their survey, they got qualitative comments, they held focus groups, they held consultations, and overwhelmingly, the people they consulted with in the international development world wanted to keep the criteria the way they are. 94% wanted to retain the relevance criterion. 98% wanted to maintain the effectiveness criterion. 93% wanted to maintain the efficiency and sustainability criteria. 89% wanted to maintain the impact criteria. Basically, the people using these criteria were happy with them. And what that affirmed was that they are all thinking in project and program terms and are therefore quite happy with project and program criteria. In the revision, they did add one new criterion, coherence. And so the revised criteria that remain the dominant criteria for international development evaluation, being widely promoted as we speak, beginning at the bottom left. Relevance is the intervention doing the right things. Impact, what difference is the intervention making? Effectiveness is the intervention achieving its objectives. Coherence, how well does the intervention fit? Sustainability, will the benefits last? Efficiency, how well are resources used? Now, these appear to be technical criteria. By that, I mean, we've gotten so used to these criteria, they are so widespread that we don't even recognize the value base of these criteria. These criteria come from the industrial manufacturing world. These are criteria of industrial manufacturing that have been carried over into development projects and programs. It's as if we're making widgets in a factory. That's how you measure effectiveness, impact, relevance, efficiency. These are industry kind of criteria, and they work really well for projects and programs and have for the last 30 years, but they aren't sufficient for transformation. We need new criteria, I've argued, to evaluate transformation. And so because we're in a global emergency, because the traditional practice of evaluation needs to change to meet transformation, we have to change the language here in the middle of the first row, from project and program language to systems and adaptations language, move from project-oriented and solutions to transformation-driven and adaptation-oriented, move from assuming a right answer to ongoing learning and adaptation in a rapidly changing, uncertain world. Instead of being oriented to goal achievement at the project and program level, move to systems transformation. And instead of assuming that we can engineer solutions, that we have to embrace complex systems, dynamic thinking, where new challenges are constantly emerging. This is a world that Tom Schwandt, a good friend and colleague, has been calling post-normal evaluation. And one of the issues that has emerged in the pandemic is when we will return to normal. Those of us who are looking at the global systems and the challenges of the climate emergency, the pandemic, the social justice movement, the pollution challenges, the challenges of the global economy, don't believe that we will return to normal. We are in a constant state now of climate emergency, of challenging the turbulence of our economy, of our health systems. The epidemiologists tell us that the COVID-19 is not even the big pandemic. A worse pandemic lurks, and we will be facing that in connection with the global emergency. And so it is in the context of believing that we are in a changed world, the Anthropocene, a new era, a new epoch of human history on this earth, that we need transformation. Again, Peter Drucker, the great management scholar, if you want something new, you have to stop doing something old. And that old are the old project and program criteria. And these aren't simply neutral criteria. When you take those project and program criteria and apply them to transformation, you actually inhibit innovation and transformation. You turn systems transformation into a project, and that weakens the intervention. It makes it diminished, and it actually does harm. So it becomes important that criteria match the nature of the change that's being evaluated. And so on the DAC website, they respond to the question, can these criteria, the traditional criteria, be used to evaluate transformational change? And the reply they said was yes and no. Yes, the criteria can be used to understand how different interventions are or are not creating transformational changes. The potential transformation effects of an intervention are captured under the new definition of impact. We expect evaluations will look more and more at questions related to transformation, reflecting the growing interest in understanding transformational change and the imperative for transformation described in both Agenda 230 and the Paris Agreement. The evaluations needed to answer these questions are still emerging. They then go on to say, however, the evaluation criteria are intended to be used in evaluating an intervention, some intentional effort to create a change in the world, in other words, a project or program. They are not a particularly useful tool for descriptive analysis of transformative change or systems change. So I agree with that. The OECD DAC criteria have served well for project and program evaluation. They're not adequate to evaluate systems change. And again, Peter Drucker, the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence, it is to act with yesterday's logic. And that is program and project logic, yesterday's logic. So I offer 6 criteria for evaluating systems transformation that are specific to the nature of that challenge. And I'll go through these very quickly. You can read about them in the article that I published if you want to go into them further. They are transformation fidelity, complex systems framing, full cost accounting, diversity, equity, and inclusion, adaptive sustainability, and interconnectedness. These are the new criteria for transformation I offer as examples of a reframing as you consider reframing and frameworks for innovation. The transformation fidelity criteria asks the question of the extent to which the realities of transformational change initiatives match transformational aspirations and rhetoric. This means that for evaluation, that we are called upon to ensure that what is called transformation constitutes transformation. Evaluate whether and how what is called transformational engagement constitutes a trajectory toward transformation. What we're running into in the world, in the context of being invited to, in fact, demanded to think green, to think in terms of sustainability, is what has come to be called greenwashing. Greenwashing is a play on the term whitewashing. Whitewashing means using misleading behavior, information to gloss over bad behavior. The people who are opposing vaccinations in the United States are whitewashing. The people who pretend to be supporting ecosystem environmental sustainability in rhetoric, but are not doing so in their behaviors, are engaged in what is called greenwashing. Greenwashing is public relations, it's politics, it's rhetoric, it's saying that we are doing something, but what evaluators are called upon is to look at the realities of the behaviors that organizations, communities, politicians, we as individuals are involved in. Are we genuinely involved in transformational behavior, or is it all just words? Is it all just rhetoric? Is it all just talk? What has come to be called transformation glossing, talking a good story, but not engaging in the behavior. A second criterion is complex dynamic systems thinking. This means that systems are the focus, what we call in the jargon, the evaluand, the unit of analysis. that natural and human systems are targeted as interrelated and interdependent. We have people who do natural systems, ecosystems evaluation, environmental evaluation. We have people who look at human systems and do social science evaluation. But in a sustainable systems transformation, nature and humans need to be integrated and looked at holistically. Complexity theory informs how we go about doing this. It means that then we assess systems transformation using systems thinking principles and complexity concepts. Seeing through a complexity lens means that complex situations are those in which the traditional logic model of inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, impacts, the linear, simple attribution model, doing formative and summative evaluation, changes under complexity to being a set of adaptations where you're constantly engaging in testing out the environment, looking at what's working, look at what's not working, coming to forks in the road. And each of these adaptations is a developmental moment, which is where developmental evaluation comes in within a Blue Marble framework. And so systems change involves looking at what the baseline system is and what new system kind of challenges are possible. Looking, as I said earlier, at interconnections, perspectives, boundaries, and dynamics from a system point of view, emergence, nonlinearities, uncertainties, uncontrollable challenges, and adaptation from a complexity point of view. There's a literature emerging about complexity concepts and complexity approaches and complexity evaluation frameworks and networks. A third criterion is resilient ecological sustainability. The sustainability criteria of OECD-DAC is not ecological sustainability, it's continuity. Do changes of the project continue? But sustainability criteria have to do with how we use the Earth's resources. It's ecological sustainability, not will there be continuity of impacts, but are we using the Earth's resources wisely? That's an adaptive sustainability criteria. You had an earlier presentation about the International Development Evaluation Association. The last conference I attended was in Prague of the International Development Evaluation Association in October of 2019. Their theme was evaluation for transformational change. On their website, you can find the Prague Declaration on Evaluation for Transformational Change. It has 10 items, one of which, number 6, is treating ecological sustainability as a universal criterion in evaluation. The focus on sustainability. It reads, in all our evaluations, that means every evaluation any one of you conducts for anyone on any topic, in all our evaluations, we commit to evaluating for social, environmental, and economic sustainability and transformation, including by assessing contextual factors and systemic changes. We commit to assessing and highlighting in all evaluations unintended negative social, economic, and environmental effects. We've had some new directions. Our American Evaluation Association Journal focused on climate adaptation and evaluating sustainability. The Canadian Evaluation Society has made sustainability a major focus of their evaluation work. The fourth criterion is eco-efficient full cost accounting. Efficiency simply looks at inputs and outputs within a closed system, within a project. Full cost accounting refers to looking at not just the costs and benefits of a project, but the larger costs and benefits on the environment, on human health. It involves externalities in economic terms. The Business Roundtable a year ago, that is the heads of the Fortune 500, largest multinational corporations in the world, made a dramatic transformational rhetorical change, saying that companies now, corporations, should not just be driven by profit, but in fact they should have a triple bottom line. That means looking at economic, social, and environmental impacts. This is taking form of looking at ecological viability, equitability. Can the earth bear the changes going on? Looking at people, planet, and profit. This is a change in criteria from simple efficiency to the impacts of our work on the natural environment, on the human environment, on our health and well-being. Eco-efficiency is the idea of the effects of what we do, not just in cost-benefit terms, but in terms of how we affect the larger world. And the future of food, the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, has been very much involved in looking and proposing methods for full cost accounting. They have a publication called Measuring What Matters in Agriculture and Food Systems that is a ecological system approach to global systems change in food and agriculture that takes a full cost accounting point of view. Two more criteria, briefly: diversity, equity, and inclusion. Evaluate how transformational engagement manifests the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion. The 21st century has witnessed a growing concentration of wealth and increasing economic inequality. As I said earlier, the wealth of 62 people is equal to the wealth of the poorest 3.5 billion people, and the richest 1% have more wealth than the other 99%. Humanity as a whole has had much less impact on Earth than the 1% who acquires more than 80% of the world's wealth generation in a year. The world's 22 richest men have more wealth than all the women in Africa. The number of billionaires in 2020 doubled. At least 119 billionaires worth about 500 billion attended the Davos conference in Switzerland. 2,153 billionaires have more wealth than 4.6 billion poorest people on the planet. Social justice criteria say that's wrong. It's hurting the environment, it's hurting the future of humanity. And so there's a major equitable evaluation initiative underway that calls for all evaluations to address equity. And the American Evaluation Association has adopted the principle that all evaluations should look at common good and equity, that evaluators should strive to contribute to the common good and advancement of an equitable and just society. This has become a theme of the American Evaluation Association: visionary evaluation for a sustainable and equitable future. The Canadian Evaluation Society has also adopted diversity, equity, and inclusion as priorities in their work. The sixth criterion and final one is what I call interconnectedness momentum, that we see things in interrelationship. When everything is connected to everything else, for better or worse, everything matters. And so Blue Marble evaluation, as we began, is about interconnectedness, interconnecting the global to the local, working across boundaries, working across silos, interconnecting things, and making transformation a part of those interconnections. To think globally, act locally and globally, and evaluate the interactions through global systems work, global systems mapping, joining our networks together, our evaluation networks, our research networks from Thailand to the United States to African countries around South America, that we are all in this together, because we have to have a sense of urgency that our future is at stake. Our posterity, the future of generations, to what the Native Americans call to the seventh generation, not just our own age, but the future. And so the traditional criteria for evaluation give rise to these new criteria: transformation fidelity, complex adaptive systems focus, resilient adaptive capacity, full cost accounting and eco-efficiency, diversity, equity, and inclusiveness, and interconnectedness momentum. And you see how these compare to the traditional DAC criteria. So In a new world, a post-normal world where we face global challenges, we need evaluation criteria that match those global challenges. And that's what Blue Marble evaluation is about. So let me give you another 5-minute break here. We'll take a short break, come back. You can put questions in the chat and to get us started in the question and answer session. And when we come back, we'll begin to interact with your questions and comments. But let me give you again, I've been talking at you now for an hour, a short respite to refresh, and I'll see you back here in 5 minutes.
โอเคค่ะช่วงนี้นะคะในช่วงของการพักสักครู่หนึ่งนะคะท่านที่มีประเด็นคำถามท่านสามารถที่จะพิมพ์ประเด็นคำถามได้ผ่านทางช่องทางแชทเช่นเคยนะคะสำหรับท่านที่อยากจะสอบถามแบบท่านวิทยากรในช่วงท้ายของการรับฟังการประชุมในวันนี้นะคะท่านก็สามารถที่จะยกมือเพื่อที่จะสอบถามคำถามได้ผ่านทางห้องแต่ละห้องที่ทุกท่านได้รับฟังอยู่ในขณะนี้ทั้งห้องภาษาอังกฤษและห้องภาษาไทยนะคะท่านสามารถที่จะสอบถามได้ตามภาษาที่ท่านได้รับฟังได้เลยนะคะในช่วงนี้เดี๋ยวอีกสักครู่หนึ่งกลับมาพบกับท่านวิทยากรใหม่ในช่วงท้ายของการบรรยายค่ะ สำหรับ PowerPoint วันนี้ของท่านวิทยากรนะคะท่านสามารถที่จะดาวน์โหลดผ่านทาง QR Code ซึ่งปรากฏอยู่บริเวณด้านล่างของหน้าจอมุมซ้ายมือของทุกท่านในขณะนี้นะคะท่านสามารถสแกน QR Code ได้เลยนะคะและในช่วงนี้ในช่องทางแชทนะคะทางคณะทำงานได้นำซอฟต์ไฟล์ในส่วนของ PowerPointใส่ไว้ให้กับทุกท่านได้ดาวน์โหลดอีกช่องทางหนึ่งด้วยนะคะ2ช่องทางด้วยกันค่ะที่ท่านสามารถที่จะดาวน์โหลด PowerPoint ในวันนี้ได้นะคะ QR Code และก็ในส่วนของไฟล์ในช่องแชทค่ะขอบคุณค่ะ
Welcome back. One possibility would be for us to let you break into breakout rooms by yourselves for 15 minutes to talk amongst yourselves and react and generate questions, and then come back and share your questions. Or we can proceed all together. Don't need to be a part of the breakout room, so you can speak in Thai to each other and get started that way, just as a matter of putting people into groups of 5 randomly for 15 minutes, if the organizers care to do that. Or we can.
There is a question. Would you like to answer to that? Raise your hand.
Sure. Let's proceed.
Yes. Yes. เชิญอาจารย์นพพรค่ะ
Thank you very much, Baton, for your excellent and very inspirational lecture. I'm Dr. Nopon, and I'm a director of Health System Research Institute here in Thailand. So my job is just after the end of this pandemic. I really hope that it will end not very far away from here. I have to perform evaluation of what happened in Thailand, how the system works, what is the success, what is the failures of us. Do you think I have to do it mainly on the healthcare system, or I have to put together multidisciplinary people to sit down and try to evaluate the economic impact, most important the political issue, and other major restriction of traveling, economic stopping transaction. Do you think which way is better, or each group of people do it separately and propose to the government for the transformation for the next pandemic that I really think it will come again 20 or 30 years from now on? And my second question is, do you think it is necessary for the whole world to do the global evaluation for this pandemic, for this global pandemic? Because I see a lot of failure system in many countries, because each country have their own restriction process, have their own protocol. Up to now, nobody talk about global herd immunity. While in some countries get stockpile of vaccine more than really need. In some countries never get the hand on the vaccine. Some countries do the restrictions, border restrictions, somebody do something. And it proved to be failure in every country. So I think the world is very interconnected, and we have a lot of traveling, we have a lot of economic activity. Do you think we have the global protocol to cope with this practical problem in the future again? Because it attack whether you are what is your color, you are rich or you are poor. So I think we have to think globally. Do you agree with me? And which one is certainly beyond my ability, beyond my scope of my country. But I think maybe you are the one who initiated the global evaluation and the transformation after this. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those important questions, and thank you for your service. You're doing very important work for Thailand and for the world. And a number of countries, in fact, all countries are doing some form of evaluation of each country's response to the pandemic. But of course, no country had complete control over their pandemic response, because we are a global society. You need information, you need testing kits. We needed supplies. The supply chains broke down of masks, of oxygen, of testing kits. And as you said, vaccines we are horribly inequitable. The world is not sharing vaccines at all in a fair and equitable way. The challenges of even knowing how many people have COVID is important, and so a part of what it seems to me that when you examine the response in Thailand, that be placed in a global context of what information was available to Thailand, when it became available, what the economic and social constraints were, and the impacts beyond the pandemic itself. So I'm currently working with the World Food Program on their response as a global organization to the pandemic. And their estimates are that in many countries, the poverty level has increased by 20 to 30% because of the economic restrictions, and that hunger has increased tremendously because of the effects on markets and on agriculture. So that a holistic approach, across silos approach, then is not just about the effects of COVID on health, on the number of people who got sick and the number of people who died, but it is on the effects of the global economy, on the movement of people, global supply chains, that the way in which the world needs to respond better, both in terms of open information and the sharing of knowledge and the sharing of the things to combat these problems. And I might share with you, if you don't mind, my own COVID story. COVID actually saved my life. I wouldn't be speaking to you tonight if I had not contracted COVID. I got COVID in June of 2020 and lost a great deal of weight. I lost close to 20 kilos in a matter of 3 months. And my partner was very worried about me, and she got COVID as well. We had moderate symptoms, not severe. We were not hospitalized. We did fine, but after recovering from the COVID symptoms, I was not gaining weight. And so she said, you know, I needed to go get a checkup. And she badgered me. And so I went and got a checkup. And it turned out that I had a very aggressive tumor in my thymus that was still fully contained, but if it had metastasized and gotten out of my thymus, being situated right between the heart and my lungs, I would have been dead within 3 months. And it was COVID that led to the early checkup and the early detection of that cancer. So most of the COVID stories are unfortunate and sad and disastrous, but that's one of the mysteries of the world, that things that are horrible for some people are gifts for others. And so COVID saved my life. And that's part of I think the challenge is while there have been devastating effects of COVID, there's also evidence of it strengthening communities, of people becoming closer, of more interdependent, of taking care of each other, of new intergenerational relationships. And certainly the whole world is learning to use the internet in different ways. You know, this seminar and my involvement would not have happened 2 years ago the way it is tonight. So part of that is to say that look for the global context of Thailand's response, look for things beyond the health system. So look at the larger systems that were affected, and look at both the positives and the negatives of something like this, because it's never just one thing or the other. There's always yin and yang. And an evaluation, one of the chapters in the Blue Marble book is entitled Looking at the Yin and Yang, having a balanced perspective on things.
Thank you very much. I believe that there is also questions in the chat box that it was left like an hour ago. So, do you want to respond to it first, or?
I answered the developmental evaluation question. I can say more about that, but the basically developmental evaluation, I think, is a way of doing Blue Marble evaluation. So Blue Marble is a further advancement of developmental evaluation. It is not meant to replace it. Likewise, Blue Marble evaluation is an advancement of principles-focused evaluation, not meant to replace that. These are new understandings that go deeper along the way. They're all based on utilization-focused evaluation. So all of my evaluation work begins by being clear about purpose and use, and that led to developmental evaluation, principles-focused evaluation, and now Blue Marble evaluation, but they don't replace each other. They add to each other in a more holistic, comprehensive approach.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me check for others. Ajahn Chiti, do you want to ask the questions? I saw you on the monitor now.
All right, so I'll take the offer. So first of all, thank you very much, Professor Patton. It is a very, very excellent presentation. And it also gives us a new perspective towards evaluation. I totally agree with you that we need to shift from traditional evaluation to what you call the Blue Marble evaluation. However, it seems to me that it is very striking. It is very frightening as well for those evaluators, because many of us may get used to the traditional evaluation systems, that we are very much silo type, not so much system thinking and not so much concerned with the holistic point of view, especially the sustainability point of view. The most important is that what I see in Thailand, to change the mindset, the tool set and the skill set of the people is one thing, but to change the structural challenge is the most important one, because at present the finance, or the budget deliveries from each ministries is very much silo. All research grants or development projects are grants on the basis of a silo approach. So it would be very difficult for one evaluator to apply Blue Mountain approach. Do you have any recommendation that what should be the strategies that we should adopt in order to challenge the structural challenge? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the comment and the question. And I certainly am not an expert on the situation in Thailand, but what you have described is the situation in every country in the world. They're all based upon siloed ministries and siloed budgets. There's a heavy accountability emphasis, auditing, very narrow kinds of constraints. And so one of the things that I've been working with some countries and agencies on is to form across ministry teams that can begin to take a more holistic view. For example, the piece that we just talked about, evaluating the Thailand's response to the pandemic, might well be made up of a team from different ministries looking at how the pandemic affected each ministry, both inside Thailand and the effects internationally on Thailand from the larger world, so that you're quite right. No single evaluator can do a Blue Marble evaluation. It is a team activity. It is an interdisciplinary activity, and it is something that we have to learn to do. So in a way, it's a part of the ancient proverb that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And so I urge people, wherever they are, to begin looking for opportunities to do a little bit, to add more attention to sustainability, to add a bit more attention to these larger system relationships, to begin by asking system questions. You know, what is the system that we're dealing with, both within Thailand, and how is that system affected by regional systems and global systems, so that we learn together to begin to make this transformation within evaluation. The title of my article was Evaluating Transformation Requires Transforming Evaluation. We have been part of a very rigid planning system, a top-down controlling military kind of thinking system around the world. And in a complex, dynamic world that is more bottoms up, that is more changing, that's not able to be controlled, where we have to be adapting quickly and sharing information, evaluators will have to learn to do that well. And that's going to mean working across some of those silos, looking for opportunities to do that. It's going to mean pushing the international agencies to change how they commission evaluations, and the people who require evaluations to begin thinking differently. It's a big systems change for all of evaluation. And as you suggested, it begins with a vision, with a mindset that we need to do things differently. And I think the urgency will only increase because the climate emergency is going to increase. Things are going to be getting worse, and they're going to be getting worse very quickly, so that it's going to require us to do things differently in an emergency. And this is about being prepared, beginning to lay the groundwork, getting ready for that new world, doing whatever you can, wherever you can, taking small steps, but realizing that we need to be on a pathway to doing things differently for our collective survival. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much. I also just followed what you are saying, that maybe little by little we can just adding the concepts, as you just mentioned, that it's not replacement, but it's just working together. Maybe we can start from talking with those who handling evaluation in Thailand to start taking the concept into what we call the grand concept of silo, something to make sure that everything maybe little by little to change into what we think that it will be benefit.
And the reason I mentioned the UN Food System Summit is that could well be an opportunity to do some of that, because there are dialogues taking place in Thailand. There are groups in Thailand that are part of the Food System Summit, and that the Food System Summit is going to be about transformation. And clearly the agriculture and food systems in Thailand will be affected by climate change and by the changes in world agriculture, trade flows. And so there's an opportunity there for people to connect, for evaluators to connect with people doing the food systems dialogues. I've been noticing since I got involved in this, that the food systems dialogue, the UN people are bringing together people from agricultural ministries and markets and and farmers and policymakers, but they're not including evaluators in this, and and researchers. Narrow some food researchers, but usually very narrow agriculture commodity researchers, not people who are seeing the connection between families and communities and the larger systems in nature and families and communities. So there's an opportunity there that's very immediate. There are resources that are pouring into the UN Food Systems Summit. There's systems thinking and complexity thinking that frames that. So I urge people who are part of this to look around and find out who's involved from Thailand in the Food Systems Summit and bring an evaluation perspective and perhaps a blue marble perspective to that work.
Yeah, I think that it's quite a good move, and maybe we shall also connect via another route, like well, we have the national agenda, and also with the pandemic is come to and a shock that make everybody to look back and maybe reconsider what should be changed for after the pandemic, which we don't know when it's going to end. That, well, we believe that everybody agree in common that things going to change from what is happened before. And well, I will calling for the questions from our participant. Again, as the MC mentioned, that well, you can also talk directly to Professor Patton, or you can also ask the interpreter to ask for you, and also go through the chat box. Um,
ท่านสามารถสอบถามเป็นภาษาไทยได้นะคะโดยทางล่ามจะได้แปลภาษาให้ท่านสามารถสอบถามได้ผ่านทางห้องที่ท่านได้ฟังอยู่ในขณะนี้เลยนะคะเรียนเชิญอาจารย์จิตติอีกครั้งหนึ่งค่ะเรียนเชิญค่ะ
Excuse me, may I have another question? Professor Patton, what do you do with the traditional criteria which has been proposed by those manufacturing industry? Do you still keep them, or you just ignore them?
I think that the ideal would be to help connect projects and programs together in a bigger picture. That's the direction we need to go. And so it's possible that projects and programs will certainly continue, but that in looking at what a particular project or program accomplishes, we try to expand it to these larger questions, and sustainability being a key one. So that one of the things I'm doing a great deal with my consulting is helping projects of all kinds to, again, starting small, that one-step journey of 1,000 miles, by adding a different definition of sustainability in the traditional criteria. So changing sustainability from a static notion that we had a baseline, we've made a change, now that's a new baseline and it just continues, which is continuity, that that's a criterion that I find it's helpful to start shifting to adaptability, to resilience, and to more an ecological sustainability. That's one of the windows into taking the traditional criterion and expanding it and changing it, because it's actually, as currently stated, more a criterion that donors and that funders like. Donors and funders like to know if they paid for something that it continues. But that's not where the world is now. We don't need to go from one static state to a new static state. What we need is the capacity to adapt, to be resilient, to respond to new things. And the pandemic has actually opened that door. I did a blog post early in the pandemic in which I said, we are all developmental evaluators now. Every program is having to what's called pivot. Pivot in English has become the word of the year. Adapt, change. Nobody can just go about their regular plan. So it's possible to build on that experience and to use the old sustainability criteria as a reframing to say, let's think about sustainability differently. It's not rejecting it. It's sort of a zen of taking it and using the force of that and turning it in a new direction, not opposing it, not trying to attack it, but let's take sustainability, the old criteria, and turn it, pull it in a new direction. That's a good place to begin, to open up. And I think that's true with some of the other criteria as well, but that's the one that I think, along with impact, as the DAC statement itself said, they're prepared to say that impact includes a broader kind of systems change. So the two old criteria that are most amenable to reframing are sustainability and impact. Impact can move to transformation, and sustainability as continuity can move to resilient, adaptable sustainability. And that begins to make that broader transition. At least that's my hope, and that's how I've been working on things. Thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you very much. While we waiting, may I ask a bit about what do you think about the pathway to make the blue marble being adopted? I mean, worldwide or something?
Well, one of the things that gives me hope, I'm an old man, as you can tell, but I've been privileged to win and be given a number of evaluation awards over the years. But the greatest award and honor that I've received was 5 years ago when my daughter told me she wanted to become an evaluator. And she wanted to because she saw that evaluation could contribute to a more sustainable and just world. And that those were her commitments. That's the kind of world that she wanted to have and be a part of. And so there are now, that I know about, 8 of us old timers, the people who helped create the field, whose children have decided to become evaluators. And I'm finding that the youth movement in evaluation, what's called Eval Youth, is deeply committed to sustainability and blue marble evaluation. The young evaluators have come on with this. And in fact, if I may show you a wonderful example of this, the young woman, African-American woman, who delivered the poem at the inauguration of President Biden's inauguration. A young woman, 20 years old, is the United States Poet Laureate. Let me show you her contribution to blue marble evaluation. I can pull it up here. I'm going to share. Give me just a second and I will, here we go. This is what gives me hope.
On Christmas Eve, 1968, astronaut Bill Anders snapped a photo of the Earth as Apollo 8 orbited the moon. Those three guys were surprised to see from their eyes a planet looked like an Earthrise, a blue orb hovering over the moon's gray horizon with deep oceans and silver skies. It was our world's first glance at itself, a first chance to see a shared reality, a declared stance, and a commonality, a glimpse into our planet's mirror. And as threats drew nearer, our own urgency became clearer as we realized that we hold nothing dearer than this floating body we all call home. We've known that we're caught in the throes of climactic changes some say will just go away, while some simply pray to survive another day. For it is the obscure, the oppressed, the poor who, when the disaster is declared done, still suffer more than anyone. Climate change is the single greatest challenge of our time. Of this, you're certainly aware. It's saddening, but I cannot spare you from knowing an inconvenient fact, because it's getting the facts straight that gets us to act and not to wait. So I tell you this not to scare you, but to prepare you, to dare you to dream a different reality where, despite disparities, we all care to protect this world, this riddled blue marvel, this little true marvel, to master the verve and the nerve to see how we can serve our planet. You don't need to be a politician to make it your mission to conserve, to protect, to preserve that one and only home that is ours. To use your unique power to give next generations the planet they deserve. We are demonstrating, creating, advocating. We heed this inconvenient truth because we need to be anything but lenient with the future of our youth. And while this is a training in sustaining the future of our planet, there is no rehearsal. The time is now, because the reversal of harm and protection of a future so universal should be anything but controversial. So, Earth, pale blue dots, we will fail you not. Just as we chose to go to the moon, we know it's never too soon to choose hope. We choose to do more than cope with climate change. We choose to end it. We refuse to lose. We do this and more, not because it's very easy or nice, but because it is necessary. Because with every dawn we carry the weight of the fates of this celestial body orbiting a star, and as heavy as that weight sounded, it doesn't hold us down, but it keeps us grounded, steady, ready, because an environmental movement of this size is simply another form of an Earthrise. To see it, close your eyes, visualize that all of us in this room and outside of these walls or in these halls, all of us change makers, or in a spacecraft floating like a silver raft in space, and we see the face of a planet anew. We relish the view, we witness its round green and brilliant blue, which inspires us to ask deeply, wholly, what can we do? Open your eyes, know the future of this wise planet is right in sight, right in all of us. Trust this earth uprising, all of us bring light to exciting solutions never tried before, for it is our hope that implores us at our uncompromising core to keep rising up for an earth more than worth fighting for.
This is very nice.
So that's what gives me hope. The young people are rising to the occasion.
Okay. Any further questions? Okay. Let we check the chat room a bit. Well, it seemed that we have lots of things to things, and well, we should work together in order to promote the concept. I believe that everybody has lots of things to take in account and to use in the future from your presentations. So I believe that it's okay. So I believe that there is no further questions, and that will come to the conclusions that well, on behalf of the TSRI and the FPRI, I would like to thank Professor Patton for sharing the experience today, and also the valuable concepts that I believe that this will contribute a lot to our ways of thinking and making the future evaluations. And I believe that with lots of directors and senior evaluators with us today, we believe that it will take into account and hope that, well, maybe little by little, it will fulfill the goal that you hope in the futures. And I also would like to thank all of the participants for taking your time out of your busy schedule to be here with us today. And this means a lot to the TSRI and the FPRI. As Dr. Prapashan already mentioned at the beginning, we believe that the work of building the consortium of the evaluators will continue, and we still hope to work with you guys and also with Professor Patton as well. We need a lot of good inputs and ideas to improve the evaluations, concepts, and networks. Again, thank you very much. I wish you good health and safety from the pandemic. Thank you.
ค่ะในนามของสกสวร่วมกับมูลนิธิสวคต้องขอบพระคุณทุกท่านอีกครั้งนะคะที่ได้ให้เกียรติเข้าร่วมในส่วนของการบรรยายในการประชุมสัมมนาทางวิชาการครั้งที่4ในวันนี้นะคะแล้วก็หวังเป็นอย่างยิ่งว่าจะได้รับความร่วมมือจากทุกท่านเป็นอย่างดีในทุกครั้งที่ได้มีการจัดประชุมทั้งในส่วนของการประชุมสัมมนาวิชาการและการประชุมเครือข่ายของผู้ประเมินนะคะก่อนจะจากกันไปวันนี้นะคะจะขอความกรุณาทุกท่านนะคะช่วยทำแบบสอบถามหลังการประชุมนะคะโดยแบ่งเป็น2ส่วนด้วยกันในส่วนแรกจะเป็นแบบสอบถามหลังการเข้าร่วมประชุมนะคะและในส่วนของแบบที่2จะเป็นแบบสอบถามเพื่อที่จะจัดทำฐานข้อมูลทำเนียบนักประเมินผลการวิจัยและนวัตกรรมในประเทศไทยนะคะและสำหรับวันนี้นะคะทางสกสวร่วมกับมูลนิธิสวคต้องขอบพระคุณทุกท่านเป็นอย่างสูงอีกครั้งค่ะสำหรับวันนี้สวัสดีค่ะ